I will call the regular Zoning Board of Appeals meeting of Charter Township of Union to order December 7th, 2022 at 7 p.m. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll move next to roll call. Tara, if you could help us with that, please.
Buckley.
Here.
LaBelle.
Here.
Mogenberg.
Here.
Fresno.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you. I assume everyone's had ample time to review the agenda. Is there any discussion of any changes to the agenda? And if not, I would take a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Brandon. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Correspondence and board reports in our packet. You can see we have expiration dates looming for many of us, as well as some of the other boards. So I always encourage anyone to reach out to anyone of interest in serving on any of the boards or commissions. Rodney, do you have any updates for us in terms of commission or board reports?
I don't have anything else at this time.
Perfect. Moving on, approval of the minutes. If you look at your packet, we had a copy of the January 5th, 2022 regular meeting. I was looking for any discussion or comments on that. If there are none, I would accept a motion to approve those minutes as presented.
Motion to approve minutes as
Motion
presented.
to approve, Liz. Any support?
Second.
Second, Buckley. I'm assuming no other discussion. All those in favor of approval of the minutes of the January 5th, 2022 regular meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, public comment. As a reminder, public comment at this portion of the meeting is restricted to 3 minutes, and it's regarding any issues that are not on tonight's agenda. So this is open public comment for items other than our new business. Open public comment at 7:03. Do we have anybody in the audience tonight wishing to speak on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close public comment at 7:03. Item 8, new business. First item up is PZBA 22-0001, Thrive Community Church, request for a zoning ordinance text interpretation. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the format of how this will work.
Andy, I'm just going to be recused.
I'm going to get to that in just for a second here.
Good.
We're going to open this, which is the public hearing that's been produced. A notice has been produced publicly, so obviously, based on our attendance in the audience tonight, that notice was well received. I'm going to have staff make an introduction regarding the application. There will be a brief comment from the township attorney, and at that point, we will be hearing from the applicant. So we do have a member who needs to recuse himself. Mr. LaBelle is going to recuse himself from the discussion, so you're able to remain present in the meeting. You just can't have you speaking regarding anything to do with this public hearing. So.
Yep, so I'm recusing myself from the commenting on this and voting on this PZBA 22-001.
Perfect, thank you. Rodney, can you open us up here?
I can't, unfortunately, Brandon, you're going to need to leave the table as well.
Leave the table, yep, no problem.
So, well, thank you. This item is before you as an interpretation of the text of the zoning ordinance. It's somewhat unusual in that the applicant has chosen to identify a particular property as well, so that there's a parcel number involved, a 10-acre property involved. This comes out of discussions related to a potential development project. That you have our report dated November 28th that summarizes some of the summarizes the meetings that staff had with the applicant about this project dating back to 2021. In our discussions, we had wide-ranging discussion about the scope of the activities that were involved. As at the time of our initial meeting, they were looking for ideas of what properties they should be looking for. They didn't have a particular site in mind. Based on the scope of activity, we suggested the B4 district. That's the general business district, because it met the criteria that they were looking for. They wanted something that had more the business elements to it, as well as be able to have a church there. And the B4 district met those standards. We recommend the B4 primarily because of the areas that they were looking at. There were B4 zone properties that were vacant. We suggested a few parcels at the time, at least to look at. We also later noted that the B5 district had the same set of standards. We have 3 business districts in the township: B4, B5, and B7. The B4 and B5 in this case basically have the same set of permitted use standards as it would apply to this particular project. The B7 district, though, is different. It does not have all the same allowed uses in it. So, as you note in our report, when they came back to us in June of 2022, at this point we're looking at a particular parcel. That parcel is Zone B7. So we did have a discussion about how that would potentially impact their project, and that there were some activities that they had proposed that were not allowed in the B7. We noted those in our report. We did suggest some ways that they could pursue that particular property. One of them is to pursue a rezoning of the property to either the B4 or the B5 district. To apply for a text amendment to add allowable uses into the B7 district that aren't there now. We've also suggested to the applicant that they look at the idea of doing what's called a planned unit development, or PUD. This is an optional development method, or approval method. It essentially combines a rezoning with a concept plan for the development, and it allows an applicant to propose kind of creative options. It's for a project that could be a very attractive one in the community in that particular site, but that doesn't necessarily fit into the tight box of the existing zoning classification. We have used this district in other cases where similar circumstances of needing a little bit more flexibility, so it's an option that's available to any applicant to propose. It does require rezoning, it does require both planning commission board action, but it is an option to pursue, and it would allow them to list the very specific activities that they would like to have as part of that PUD. So it sort of creates a custom zoning district, you might say, associated with a concept plan for the project. We also suggested that they could simply apply for site plan approval and take this matter to the planning commission. As part of a site plan, the applicant is required to provide a detailed use statement on the site plan, similar to the one you have in your packet. And in this case, then the planning commission, whenever they're reviewing a site plan, they also review the list of proposed uses as part of that project to verify whether they're consistent with the zoning district or not. So all these items, all 4 of those options, are planning commission related items. The applicant has chosen not to pursue that. So this matter, they submitted this application, and after asking for advice from our township attorney who's here tonight, Mr. Eric Morris, this item has been placed on the agenda for this public hearing tonight. So with that, as we go along, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's just a quick summary.
Thank you, Rodney. Mr. Morris, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I will be exceedingly brief. First of all, I'd like to apologize to the board for the tardiness of my legal memo. It was a little bit more complex than I expected, followed up by an administrative error on my side that made it worse. So let me start by saying that. Secondly, I'm going to try and give you I think first of all, Rodney has outlined the issues very well already. I will simply say this. This interpretation request, in the typical sense, there would be an ambiguity in the ordinance that needs to be resolved. And when you think of it in that context, the ambiguity that, in effect,
the applicant is asking you to resolve is to say that each of the listed uses in this use statement that you have are either a principal permitted use in B7, or they're obviously clearly an accessory use to a religious institution in B7. In order for you to essentially take the applicant's argument, position, and find for them, you would have to find each one of these is either its own principal use, and if so, that use is allowable in B7, or that it is for sure an accessory use. And to do that, you only have the information provided in the packet, provided from the applicant, and what you learned today. So that's the issue that you're presented with, and I just wanted to kind of take the opportunity to frame it in that way, because I think Rodney is right to do that. We see approximately 10 potential uses listed here. So when you start digging into it, there's a lot to this. That's all I have to say, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. As a matter of formality, we are not going to get into a discussion tonight. We're very interested in hearing from everyone who's come here to speak tonight. Unfortunately, the format of these meetings is not one of a back and forth interaction. So we encourage everyone who's interested to come and speak at the microphone. I do ask that the applicant identify one person to represent them and speak on their behalf as the applicant, and then we will have time for members of the public who wish to speak. The members of the public will be granted 3 minutes to speak, and we'll have time kept, and we'll notify you of a 30-second warning, and then when your time is up. The intent here tonight is to let everyone be heard. It is a public hearing. We want to hear the input from the public. So we appreciate everyone participating. I just ask that we follow that procedure and that we don't engage in attempts to try and ask each other questions. That being said, the board, as we begin our deliberation, we may come up with questions that we have an interest in hearing back from the applicant. So we would ask that designated representative to come back to the podium, and we would ask the questions. Likewise, if members of the board have questions for staff or Mr. Morris, we can certainly get those questions answered. So with that being said, I would like to invite the applicant or applicant representative to the podium to state their case.
Well, good evening. My name is Aileen Leiprant. I'm an attorney from a law firm called Silverhand, and I've been engaged to assist Thrive Church as they hopefully work through a productive relationship with the township. And I want to start our conversation on that basis because I think there's many things that we may not agree on, but I think there are some key things that we agree on. And I want to start first with thanking Mr. Nanny for inviting us to have conversations with him. And it was a concern that came out of that conversation that drove us to ask for an interpretation. So I want to thank Mr. Nanny for approaching this with some ideas about how the church could proceed in this township, because there's a lot of investment that goes into building something, a tremendous investment. And so when you proceed, you have to proceed with care. So I want to just briefly talk about some of the options that were evaluated and why we're here in front of you as opposed to pursuing some other options. First, a concept of rezoning or requesting a text interpretation in a different way through your zoning process is an extraordinarily complicated and lengthy process. Very lengthy, and for that reason, very costly. So we did evaluate that and looked at it as not a practical and effective use of the resources. The other thing that Mr. Nanny mentioned was actually pursuing a PUD. And we have a professional, probably, disagreement about whether or not that PUD would actually work in this process, because we have carefully examined your zoning ordinances. And if the interpretation is that the church is a theater, your PUD ordinance, as it relates to the B7 district, would not permit the church, because that would be deemed the principal use of the church. So we carefully evaluated that because I agree with Mr. Nanny, a PUD process can be a creative way to solve issues, but that creative way isn't gonna work for us in this context. The other solution that Mr. Nanny proposed was that we just go right to the Planning Commission to have this conversation. The challenge with that approach is the cost estimate to even get in the door with the Planning Commission on a preliminary site plan is about $40,000. And if this township's interpretation of its ordinance that an accessory use by the church of its facility creates it or causes it to be a church, we can't proceed with the Planning Commission because that's the interpretation. And we would have to rezone the property or do something else. So we fundamentally have this gatekeeping thing that we can't get in front of the PUD without spending $40,000 on a site plan. And if it's your interpretation or the township's interpretation that the accessory use of Thrive or the accessory uses deem it to be something else, be it a church or something else, then there's no point in going in front of the PUD. That would have been sunk cost of $40,000 that can't be recouped. There are other ways to spend that money to get a resolution of this matter. So I wanted to start this conversation or the explanation in a way that hopefully is positive in that we appreciate Mr. Nanny offering up solutions, but there were practical and fundamentally problems with or challenges with the way that your ordinance was drafted that would not allow us to proceed efficiently and effectively in those courses, because it seems like the first thing we need to know is what do you think of a religious institution and how it's defined under your ordinances? And if what the church has described deems it a religious institution, then we just really need to approach this completely different because the PUD process is not available to us, nor is the site planning process, because your planning commission is charged with enforcing your interpretation. And by your, I'm talking generally the township. So moving on to why we're here today, I appreciate that what's typically in front of you as the ZBA is looking at setbacks or determining variance requests. I appreciate that because I'm on a ZBA and that's what usually comes in front of us. So that's why I want to take a little bit more care in describing why we're here today, because there is a process available under your ordinance to ask for a text interpretation. That process doesn't require there to be an ambiguity. It is a question that we would like to have answered, and your ordinance has a framework for us to do that. So if we weren't permitted to do what we're asking here in terms of asking for an interpretation, I would certainly think our rejection or our application would have been rejected. So I'm just trying to explain to you, we are trying to follow your ordinance and the precise procedure that's outlined to get an answer to a very particular question. Now let's talk about what that question is. I hope that you received in your packet our recent letter from December 1st, because our application was pretty specific about what we asked for an interpretation of. The agenda material asked for something different. So that's a procedural matter that potentially is something we're gonna have to work out with your legal counsel or the counsel for the township. But I don't see that as being a stumbling block for us to proceed with the request for interpretation as we've outlined it in our application. Did you all get a copy of the December letter that we sent? I'm seeing puzzled looks on your faces.
We have copies of many things, yes.
Okay, the December 1st letter is what I'm inquiring about.
That's what I was looking for. I'm showing an August 8th letter.
We have a letter to the township dated August 8th. We have a letter to the township dated September 7th. We have a letter to the township dated September 27th.
We received it via email last night.
That was the
Okay.
Yeah.
piece that came.
Okay, just want to confirm that we're all on the same page there. The other thing I want to acknowledge is I do appreciate Eric's comment about the question, Mr. Woods, my professional colleague, Mr. Woods' comment about the issue before us. Because the matter that's described on your agenda doesn't deal with what we believe the fundamental question here is an accessory use by a church, whether it's to invite the Girl Scouts in or whether it's to host a musical concert, is that accessory use a permitted use under your ordinance? The definition, and that is, I could quote chapter and verse from our application to you, which raises the precise question. The question that's presented on your agenda here does not deal with the fundamental question about what an accessory use is and how that's interpreted under your ordinance. So if you can bear with me, we requested an interpretation that the primary and secondary uses of Thrive's proposed structure, as outlined in our application, and at Mr. Nanny's request, we provided a statement of use and tried to be as transparent and frank with the township on what we're trying to do here, falls within the definition of religious institution under your ordinance. The reason that's so key is because we're not talking about principal use here. If there's one thing that I think we're all in agreement on, at least as we stand here today, Thrive is a religious institution. So we're not questioning whether somebody's coming before you and masquerading as something other than a religious institution. So if we can take that principal use question off the table, and I recognize you may still have a question about that, but what we're really talking about here is the accessory use. And we tried to be, and I think Mr. Nanny would acknowledge that the conversations with the township have been frank about what we hope or what the church hopes it can accomplish with its accessory uses. Bear in mind, those are secondary to the principal purpose of the church, to function as a church. So the interpretation, again, that we're asking you today is looking at the statement of use before you. Are those uses, and would you determine those uses, find my notes here, as outlined in our application, to fall within the definition of religious institution? That's what we've asked you to decide. As the structure's not being built, nor is it being designed for the purpose of a theater, that's really why we're here to talk in front of you today. So let me just now turn very, and I don't want to get over superly, lawyerly, and technical here, so I'm going to focus on the definitions because that's what you're asking to take a look at. So first and foremost, under the plain language of the ordinance, there is a definition of religious institution, and that's a definition that we would direct your attention to. Any structure primarily and regularly used for religious assembly or activity. But the definition doesn't stop there. Accessory uses and structures commonly associated with religious institutions include, but are not necessarily limited to. That is intentional language in your ordinance, and that intentional language is also described in your ordinance to be expansive. And those uses are then listed as assembly halls, kitchens, food pantries, food preparation facilities, classrooms, gymnasiums, gyms, and playgrounds. So you've got what it means to be a church, and then the other things that are permitted are accessory uses. You're given a list, some examples, not an exhaustive list, and including but not limited to. But there's also the term accessory use. And so if you look at the way your ordinance defines accessory use, it includes a use, building, or structure which is incidental to, customarily found in connection with, subordinate to, and located on the same zoning lot. So you don't just stop with the list that you're given on the prescribed permitted accessory uses. You also look to the definition. And are the activities that are being described by Thrive Church, are they customarily found in connection with a church? and then you've got the additional language of your ordinance. To help you make that determination, we identified about a dozen examples of churches in your community or just outside the bounds of your township, and did a relatively brief search identifying for you some of those uses that these churches are making of their structure. Some of these are within your township. For instance, Potter's House, which I understand is located in Ag District Zone, they hosted the Muwanda Children's Choir, an African children's choir. And is our township now going to say, by the way, you shouldn't have done that? Hosting a concert in your facility deems you a theater. Are we going to have the zoning administrator coming out to fine somebody or to administer an ordinance enforcement for that? They host family movie nights. They host ice cream social and movie nights. You don't have to take my word for it, because we provided the substantiation. We printed out web pages to give you this information. Like, we're not making this up. This stuff is happening. The same is true of Marantha Baptist Community Church, who hosted a community movie night showing Tangled. That was in July of 2017. We have the Mount Pleasant Seventh-day Adventist Church, who hosted a holiday snack buffet with helpful advice on how to navigate the holidays and maintain your weight. So again, we're talking about a community activity, an invitational thing that happened within this church. We have the First Baptist Church, who hosted a pizza and paint party for the first 40 people who signed up. They also have soccer fields. The interesting thing about it is, as I understand it, and Mr. Nanny, certainly, I'm not a resident of your township, so I don't know it as well as the rest of you do. But based on our assessment and the looking that we've done here, you do not have a church in B4. You do not have a church in B5. You do not have a church in B7. All of your churches are operating in districts that, under this interpretation, if you deem that their accessory use transforms them into a primary use, those activities that they do to the community, those invitational activities, would be prohibited. What we're suggesting to you is that narrow interpretation is constrained and doesn't make sense, just in a typical common sense application. How we can also get there is when we look at the defined term under your ordinance of theater. And again, this is in our materials. A theater is a facility designed to accommodate groups of people viewing an artistic performance. Wouldn't that be every church? What building that has a common space area or a screen that drops down isn't being constructed for somebody to view? Our assessment of this, because that definition doesn't stop there, of theater, it goes on to say theaters may be drive-in or outdoor. So I can assure you, based on your review of the statement of use, you're not going to find any statement of use that Thrive Church plans to build an outdoor drive-in movie theater. They don't plan to build an indoor movie theater. They plan to build a worship space that, in an incidental or secondary way, may be a place to invite the high school band to have a band performance, or maybe a place where they can host a graduation ceremony, or it may in the future be a place where people come to vote. And if you say one of those accessory uses transforms it into a principal use, you've really eliminated the whole point of saying there are accessory uses. Then everything becomes a principal use. And we've looked at your ordinances and don't find a particular prescription that says every accessory use must be permitted in the ordinance. That's not the point of it. The point is the principal use has to be permitted in that ordinance, and then your accessory uses consistent with that principal use are permitted. So for instance, at Thrive Church, we're gonna host an African children's concert like Potter's House did in an incidental way, secondary to its function as a church, that would not transform it into a theater. Now, I submit to you, if it turns out that Thrive builds a facility that shows movies at 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, 5 days a week, I would expect that the township is gonna go out there and shut them down for operating as a movie theater. That's a different animal, and that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is a principled and rational look at what it means to be a church, what accessory uses are typically and customarily found with the church. We've tried to give you the tools to make that decision by looking into your community and into your neighbors and looking at what your neighboring churches are doing and what your community churches are doing and saying this practical interpretation that we're seeking is so that the next step we can do is go to the planning commission. Because I know Mr. Nanny wants us to be there, and we want to be there, but we want to be there with some more comfort that we're going to be received with an understanding that if we host a musical incidental to our worship services, that we haven't spent $40,000 to only then hear, oh, you're a theater, we're done talking. So again, I would like to reorient you to our request for interpretation as stated in our application. I welcome questions from you. If you have any questions, I welcome them. I'd also like to invite Pastor Dave to speak with you about this. If you have any particular questions about the use or what Thrive intends, I invite you to ask those questions directly of him. Before I leave the podium.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant at this time?
Well, I have, that's a thorough presentation.
So, I don't want to cut you off, but I want you to get started. We're going to let the public hearing happen, so I don't know if anything you have to say would be impacted.
I can wait.
by
I
that.
can wait.
So,
Nope, I can wait.
okay,
Yep.
perfect. Thank you very much. So we technically opened the public hearing at 7:04, so we're going to take comments from the public since the attorney was, I forget your name, I apologize.
That's a challenge. Aileen Lightbrand.
Since Ms. Lightprint has already spoken on behalf of the applicant, we are inviting our first speaker up, so you'll have a limit of 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, Chair, I just want to clarify, I wrote 7:12 when,
Okay, okay, I was, very good, 7:12, thank you.
okay.
Welcome.
Hello, my name is Pastor Dave Shepard. I have the honor and privilege of leading Thrive Church here in Central Michigan, and since we began in our existence in 2013, our goal has been not just to be a church that's in our community, but a church that is for our community, that is serving our community, that's actively engaged, and is unashamedly externally focused, trying to outreach into our community, trying to care for the needs of our community, and trying to create open doors that show that we are not simply existing for ourselves, but we are existing to serve the people around us. That has existed in a number of different ways, whether it's been through giving out thousands of pairs of shoes to local elementary students, or serving community service hours, or giving money back to the community. Any one of those things that we've done as a portable church ministry has existed separate from our primary purpose, but as an arm of our outreach ministry model. And as we look at what a church is and what a church is able to do in this area, what existed as a church 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, is different than what a church of 2013 looks like and what an outreach-based church of 2013 looks like. And I believe that looking at church as a religious institution, as a group that meets exclusively on Sunday mornings or meets only for prayer gatherings, is an antiquated model of what a church actually is and what a church does and what a church should be for this community. So as we do this, we have been pointed, as was just shared, to the B4, B5 district, which was concerning to me because it painted a picture that made us look as though we were trying to hide what we were doing as an offshoot of ministry rather than an extension of our ministry. Our ancillary accessory uses are and always will be accessory uses. Our primary purpose is to help people find and follow Jesus, and that is what we exist to do in this community. That's all we want to do in this community. And what I read in the plain language of the Township Ordinance, any accessory use that's listed with religious institutions shows that it's both common and anticipated that religious institutions are going to do more than simply gather on Sunday mornings. And so I want that to be considered as you guys look at this ordinance, as you look at what the definition is, that this non-exclusive language, it implies that unique churches have unique approaches, and ours fits that same mold. With that, we've faced significant hurdles. We've faced expense by hiring legal to look at this with us, to read, interpret, and guide us and understand what the regulated uses look like. That's led us to where we are. But each of those accessory uses is an accessory use. Yes, there are several listed. Yes, there are many different things because we wanted to be overly transparent in what we want to do and how we want to include the community in our space. But we will always be a church. We are a church. We exist to help people find and follow Jesus. So these limitations are concerning because they can significantly slow down our ability to expand our outreach methods and serve our community. So please consider that as you discuss today.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak tonight? Welcome.
Hello, my name is Deb Schaefer, and I've been a resident of Union Township for the last 25 plus years. I'm also a member of Thrive Church. Our church...
Do we state address as well? I'm sorry, just to clarify.
Sure. 1596 Belmont Drive is my current address. I've also had 2 previous addresses
Current is
in the,
fine. Thank you.
in the township. Thrive Church has a unique perspective in that no perfect people are allowed. That's one of our taglines. The outreach to the community that we do is one of the reasons that I joined Thrive Church, because our community needs strong leadership and people who will stand up for the underdog. I'm a youth leader at the church. I'm privileged to get to work with the high school girls. They come to my house once a week. This is not just a Sunday thing. They come to my house because we don't have a building. I have a small group that I belong to, and there's a sense of community in this church that I have never felt anywhere in my life. I've been a member of this community for over 30 years. I have never felt as accepted or as part of a family as I have since I've walked into this building, okay, to this church, where we don't really have a building. We meet in the old Coca-Cola bottling plant. That doesn't matter because we're doing the work that God gave us to do. We're outreaching to the community in a way that no church I've ever belonged to has done. Anyone who walks in the door is welcome. I don't understand why we wouldn't want this in our township. I've gone to other churches in our township. I see the outreach that they're doing, and it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. The positive things need to be brought out further. We need to increase the positive instead of reducing it. I don't know why we would put ties on this. I don't know why we would stop a church from building in our community. That being said, I would ask you to look at your own rules, because it sounds like religious institution fits in B7 as a zone. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the ins and outs, but it sounds like religious institution fits, and that's what we are.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Michael Barrett. I'm a local chiropractor here. I've been in Mount Pleasant since 2005. My wife and I bought a house here in Union Township, 806 South Doe Trail, June of 2021. My wife and I own 2 businesses here in town. I have 2 teenagers. I've been attending Thrive Church since 2014. Who is Thrive Church? It's a non-denominational church. It's been around for 9 years. The mission is simple, to help people find and follow Jesus, and that's it. For 9 years, they've bounced around from various locations, from a bar to a movie theater to CMU, back to the movie theater to now back at the YFC building. Not having a building of their own has helped make Thrive an outward-focused church to do good, to help the community, Outward focused isn't something that will happen once they get a building. It is who Thrive Church is. Sorry, I lost my spot there. It's their DNA. That is their ministry. From giving away thousands of shoes to Boots, to volunteering at homeless shelter, volunteering staff and inflatables at many events, to helping with rent, food, transportation, to hosting free events for the community. The list goes on and on. Their vision is to create environments that people who have been given up on church will find irresistible. I say they create a welcoming environment for those that have given up, period. As a parent of 2 teenagers, I got asked this many times, what is there to do in town? Well, there's Maury Courts. Well, that's if you play sports and there's a fee. There's the Discovery Museum. Well, there's a fee, and that's basically for those 10 and under. The roller rink, that's closed. Ice arena, there's a fee, and that's seasonal. Movies, that's expensive. There's no mall, there's no Boys and Girls Club, there's no teen scene, etc. Wouldn't it be awesome to have a community center in the community for the community? A safe place for kids, whether they are athletic or not. A space to learn music, to get tutored, or just hang out. A place for stay-at-home mom and dads to come hang out. Be in the community with one another. A place that the community can use for concerts, performances, meetings, seminars, etc. It's safe to say that the last few years have been pretty rough for just about everybody, and especially kids. We need a space like this now more than ever, when a need has never been greater. As a business owner, as a resident of Union Township, as a father of 2 teenagers, I strongly encourage you to consider what a blessing this would be for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Matt Moore. I'm the worship pastor at Thrive Church. I've been on staff since we launched in 2013 and have been a big part of helping shape our mission, vision, and values. I'm also a touring musician who's performed all over the country, playing at literally hundreds of churches, many in this area. And I can speak pretty definitively that the mission, vision, and values we have at Thrive Church are not unique to this one church. I think Dave put it very clearly and very well when he said that the idea that churches only meet on Sunday morning and only in a very confined manner is a antiquated and outdated idea of what the church is and what the church should be. The idea that the church can be, it actually exist for our community, not just in the community, is just a huge part of who we are and what we do. And again, the idea that the community would look to the church and be able to come to the church and be a part of it is not a new thing either. The church has been a sanctuary for people for hundreds of years, a place where people from the community have gone when they've been in trouble, when they've been in stress, when they've needed things. And over the past handful of years, I don't know that there's ever been more need for community in this area and throughout the world. So the idea of what Thrive's trying to do is not unique. It's not, it may be unique to this area, but it is not necessarily unique in the scope of what churches are and what we believe churches should be. So our goal and our intention is to be a church that exists for our community, not just in our community, and primarily to help people find and follow Jesus. Yes, sir.
Thank you. For the record, I would like you to state your address.
Oh, sorry,
trying to track
711 South Arnold Street here in Mount Pleasant.
Yep. And that goes for everybody who's speaking. Member Buckley pointed that out early. I appreciate that. Anybody else care to speak tonight?
My name is Janine Chiswick. I've been a resident of Union Township for over 40 years. 4870 National Drive is where I live. The property that Thrive is considering is literally across the road from where I live. I've been a teacher in the same district for 36 years. I have seen the change in the youth of our community, and it bothers me. I am not a member of Thrive Church, but I can see the good that they want to do. I can see the impact that they want to have a community center, to have a place where people can go, especially the youth, I feel is very, very valuable. I have seen the society change, and I really feel that we need to get back to some basics. And I think Thrive, with their community involvement, they're wanting to give back. I think the youth of this community needs to know that. They need to see the benefit of giving back, because we have become very, very selfish. And I think it would be a very big benefit to not only the adults, but also the up-and-coming generations that we are trying to foster. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Anyone else care to speak? Okay. Seeing that no one else is choosing to speak, we will move to questions, discussions amongst the board. Mr. Buckley had a statement at the beginning. I'll defer back to you.
I guess one of the things, one observation I have, and at any point, if Mr. Morris would like to speak up in terms of clarifying, we had a detailed presentation from our guest, and so one of the issues, I happen to sit on the planning commission, and one of the issues that I do question that was brought up was the issue of coming to the planning commission for input on this. I guess I'm curious if we're told that the planning commission was recommended. There isn't a cost to come to be on the planning commission's agenda or to get input from the planning commission. There's zero cost for that. They can anybody can come to the planning commission and say, we would like to tell you what we want to do and get initial feedback. Is that correct, Rodney?
That is correct. If somebody asked to be put on the agenda, we would make them a presentation item for that purpose, yes.
And the planning commission can provide whatever feedback they have on a particular topic. So I want to dispel any notion that there is any cost at all to talk to the planning commission, let alone tens of thousands of dollars. Now, the idea of creating a site plan, that's true. There is money associated with creating a site plan. I wouldn't deny that. But I just want to make sure that I clarified that, that there is the notion of being able to speak to the planning commission. There is no cost. There is no lengthy delay in getting it. And in fact, if one of the remedies that was requested or that was mentioned, and I want to clarify that as well, a request for rezoning. Do you know what the cost off the top of your head for a petition to rezone?
The application fee is, I believe it's $900.
I was going to say $800. I thought it was
$800 or $900.
Yeah.
There's no plan associated with a traditional rezoning application. Let's say they were proposing to rezone from B7 to B5, which is the zoning district across the street. That would be essentially material very similar to what you have before you. It'd be written information, background stating why that rezoning is appropriate. But there would be no plan or anything like that associated with it.
Right. So I also want to clarify too, because it was stated that there was extreme expense associated with the request for rezoning, as well as an extreme duration of time. And Rodney, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a request went to the planning commission tomorrow to be on the agenda for a rezoning, there would be a nominal fee associated with that, but there would then be a public hearing associated with that. And the planning commission, most recently, the planning commission actually can approve that themselves. It doesn't go to the board.
No, rezoning is ultimately
recommended to the board.
Action.
Okay.
Right. So the planning commission holds a hearing and makes a recommendation to the board of trustees. That recommendation goes to the county. The Isabella County Planning Commission has 30 days to review and take whatever action they choose to on it in terms of comment, and then it comes to the board of trustees. Typically, the process. I think the shortest we got it done in is slightly over 2 months.
Okay.
But if you time it perfectly, you can do that.
So
but typically, it's a 3-month process.
About a 90-day process, and to request a rezoning, if it's approved, from start to finish is probably about a 90-day process for somewhere between $800, let's say $800 and $1,000. I want to dispel the notion that was presented that it is extremely costly, or that it is an extremely long period of time to get that done. Neither of those is true. So as we talk, I just want to make sure that we are operating on the actual processes of the Planning Commission and not just what has been suggested so far.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Other questions or comments from board members?
I'd like to make some comments, please.
Sure.
So, this is my first time here, by the way, so bear with me if I'm a little bit slow on this. But the reason that we're here tonight is to look at the way that it's defined and determine if they fall within the use. As I look through what Union Township says, it very clearly says any structure primarily and regularly used for religious assembly. And then it goes on and it gives some of the ideas, if you will, for accessory uses. That's not an inclusive list, and if you look at worship and you look at religious assembly, and I do want to read this from you because we are speaking of a religious organization. This is actually from the Bible, Hebrews 10:24-5. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as in the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. This is scripture, and this is what worship looks like. And so when I hear what Thrive has to say, and their accessory uses and things that would take place, those to me aren't the primary purpose of the church, but inclusively speaking, that is also worship in sense. And there's, I think, putting the limit to say, is that worship, is it a religious activity, is it an assembly? If you, and I have a list, and I won't read all of these, but if you are religious and you go through scripture, and you're going to hear various things about fellowship and meeting together, and where two or more are gathered, that is all religious assembly. So again, when I go back to the structure and the primary and regular use, I'm honestly a little bit confused as to why we're here right now, looking at the accessory uses when that list isn't all inclusive. I've gone through the exhibits that they have, and I don't see anything that stands out as something that they wouldn't do. But hearing the list and looking at the list that they've presented, those are all activities that churches within our communities do. You know, and to be stuck on the word theater, I'm not sure if it was maybe you that had said it, but somebody had brought it up. You know, I would be concerned if all of a sudden they had showings 3 days a week or something of the sort. But again, I go back to worship and what is worship and what is religious assembly, and that's a giant picture, and that's not something that can be defined specifically here, but I can definitely say that I don't feel as if it would be a theater per se. There could be theatrical performances, but a theater would be something that is set up specifically and solely for the use of regularly scheduled shows. So I think that's important to share, but also looking through this and knowing that the financial piece of everything that goes along with it, and I did hear what you had to say, Ryan, but I think the two things that Rodney had presented and what I had heard was the PUD and to do the site plan that was approximately the $40,000. I didn't hear or read anything else that had been presented by Rodney to them for options that they could do. So I do understand why you would be here right now, but that is a financial piece I feel that they've had to endure, that honestly, when I look at this, and like I said, I'm fresh and new at this, but I'm confused again at why we had to take the steps to do that, and honestly, why we had to take the steps to spend the money to get the attorney, and with all due respect, what was brought forth on our end was about Mr. LaBelle recusing himself. So if that was part of the focus, again, we're talking financials, and as the ZBA, I don't understand why we're here right now, because to me this is all black and white, that this should have been approved prior to having to be here.
Thank you, Bree.
Just to clarify again, in the materials, Mr. Nanny did say there are 4 recommended courses of action that he recommended to the applicant. The PUD was one, request for rezoning was another, the amended ordinance language, also a function of the Planning Commission. And then the site plan approval was the only thing that it was something that incurred a significant cost. A site plan is part and parcel to building anything in Union Township or anything in a municipality in general. So the money will be spent at some point. But again, I just want to clarify, those were all recommendations. 3 of those things are either low cost or free. to that organization. So I just want to make sure that we are operating on the actual reality of what this is. The reality is these were there are several options that are available that haven't been pursued yet.
And I thank you for reminding us of that, Ryan. I want to point something out too, and it won't be a popular thing to be heard by most of our audience, but one of the tasks we have as a zoning board of appeals is to evaluate the case on its merit by the facts, and financial hardship unfortunately isn't criteria that the zoning board of appeals can ever take into account. I recognize that it's often something that comes up for almost every applicant we hear from, and I sympathize with that concern, but by law, financial hardship isn't grounds for us to approve or deny anything. So, interesting topic of discussion, certainly options available at low or no cost, certainly options that go in further detail at much higher costs, but just to be clear so everyone's on the same page, unfortunately financial hardship doesn't factor into a decision that the zoning board of appeals can make. Just I want to throw that out there. Liz, do you have any comments or discussion topics?
You know, I think just thank you everybody for your time. I think it's obviously everybody has spent a lot of time on this, and I guess I'm just to somewhat echo what Bree said. It feels like the primary use is not in question. It's a religious institution, so we are here to evaluate the accessory uses, which I'm assuming is not going to be an exhaustive list. It's a list of perhaps maybes, and I guess I'm just curious what was the no that got us here? What is I assume most religious organizations don't have an exhaustive list of all of the events that they might possibly one day decide to host within their four walls or in the four walls of an accessory unit. So I don't think we'll be able to ever get to a place where we can say with certainty in this room today, everything you might ever want to do is permitted use. I guess I'm just along those same lines. Is there one sticking point? Is there one component of this accessory use that got us here? Is it the theater component, which I feel like has been rather fleshed out through all of the documentation? Is there one sticking point that we should be focused on?
Is that specific to Rodney?
To Rodney,
yeah? Okay.
I think, or Eric, either one.
I can address it just from the perspective of the conversations that were had. I'd like to make a couple of general statements to head into that. And one is I appreciate the attorney's comments to start this off. I disagree with the perspective that she shared that there can be only one principal use of this property. That is simply not the case. The zoning ordinance would allow multiple principal uses of a property in the B7 district. We see it all the time. Any shopping center has multiple principal uses. You don't have one store that's the principal use and the ones on either side are accessory uses. So it's completely possible for this property to be occupied by 3, 5 principal uses. Certainly could be occupied by more than one. And so the idea that the church is the principal use and everything is accessory use underneath that is not necessarily the case. In this case, we have, as I said, we have 3 business districts. 2 of those districts allow both religious institutions and then the separate category that goes beyond theater. I can appreciate the comments about theater, but the actual use is theaters, concert halls, and other places of public assembly. So you might say, that would say non-religious places of public assembly or secular places of public assembly, auditoriums. Certainly, it was mentioned movie theaters, but that's not limited to movie theaters or concert halls. It is various other places of public assembly. B4 and B5 allow both types of public assembly facilities, religious institutions and these non-religious places of public assembly. The B7 district does not. Only religious institutions are listed as a principal permitted use of the B7. We have to go with what the ordinance says. In the B7, theaters, concert halls, and other places of public assembly are not listed as a principal use. So therefore, they're not allowed in the B7 district. And so that's the direction we looked at from that perspective, is that there's more than one principal use. Just as, for example, one of the activities that they're talking about, and they have talked about all along, is the idea of a cafe or a coffee house, a place to bring people together. Now, coffee houses, cafes, they're often exactly that. They're a gathering place. And those things are actually allowed in all three of the business districts. It would have no issue. This is one of the reasons why we suggested initially the B4 and ultimately added the B5, is because it allowed them to have these other activities, like a cafe, like a coffee house. It's a non-issue. Go forth and prosper. We'd love to have them there. We'd love to have them doing those things, because the business district does have that broad ability to do that. That's not an option in other zoning districts where churches are allowed. Churches are allowed in I believe it's 10 of the 13 zoning districts in the township. They're allowed broadly across the community. But in the business districts, you have this additional ability to do other things that are other principal uses that can be added in that fit well with their outlook. So that's the direction we're headed. The B7 district is different than the B4 and the B5, and so we had to deal with it from that perspective. The other item that came up, and it's on your list, is related to outdoor private recreation facilities. Now, we're not talking about a playground for Sunday school kids. Okay, we're not talking. That's not what they were describing to us when we met with them. And the problem is that outdoor private recreation facilities are not allowed in the B7. They're just simply not an allowable use. There's no option. This property this project is proposed to be a part of is next door to Jameson Park, which is a public park, a public recreation facility. The Jameson Park is not in the B7 zoning district. It's zoned residential, and in the residential district, that activity is an allowable use. So we have these challenges where we have activities that are simply not allowed in the zoning district where they proposed to have them, and that's what led to the recommendations that they pursue one of these other options if they wish to pursue this particular property.
Did I answer your question?
Chairman Thiesman, would I be permitted to respond?
In just 1 minute, I want to make sure you
I
had the
think
question
so.
answered.
I think so.
If you'd like to reply to the item that's been brought up, I would allow a brief response.
We've asked for an interpretation on a religious institution, not what you can do in B7, not what you can do in B5, not what you can do in B4, but what it means to be a religious institution. But because Mr. Nanny raised what's permitted in B7, if you look at the list of principal permitted uses, it's a religious institution. So then you go to the definition of religious institution, because that's where you get what you get to do. A religious institution is any structure primarily and regularly used for religious assembly and activity or activity. Accessory uses are included within that definition and specifically mentioned, and it's including but not limited to, are places of assembly, gyms, playgrounds, kitchens. We're not asking you, what does B7 mean? Our request for interpretation, as stated very concretely in our application, is, what is your interpretation of what religious institution means and permitted accessory uses based on how it's defined in your ordinance? And respectfully to Mr. Buckley, I appreciate that from your perspective, it's not that costly for us to get to the Planning Commission and maybe it can go quickly. Our application was filed 3 months ago. 3 months ago.
I want to be careful. We're in a
not-
deliberation
We're not
phase.
going to get
We are
into
not in a back and
I
forth.
appreciate your clarification on the request for interpretation, and if we have any other questions, we'll call you back up.
I appreciate it.
Thank
It's
you.
just not that simple.
Understood. I have some comments I would like to make if there are no other members that wish to make any comments. First, I would like to say I recognize the length of time that I'm seeing in some of the dates in the application. I'm not a part of that application process, so I'm obviously not privy to all of the behind-the-scenes components that have gone on to get us to this point. But I do appreciate Thrive's patience in working with the township to get us to this point of being in front of the ZBA. I can only speak for myself, not the other members, but it's very clear to me that the applicant's proposed primary use or principal use is religious in nature. Furthermore, the auxiliary uses proposed, while they appear minor and infrequent in nature to me, were clearly stated by the applicant as being consistent with their mission in community outreach ministry. To me, I personally have no interest in being a party to trying to scrutinize what is or is not religious in nature. That's not my place. So we're here charged with the task of determining a textual interpretation. It's very clear to me that the principal use that the applicant is proposing is religious in nature, and we have definitions that allow accessory uses, and I won't begin to try and scrutinize those personally. Public assembly, not the church community, all kinds of different offshoots or extensions of the mission, I think are going to be easily answered at the time in which this applicant would be in front of the planning commission with a plan. It's hard for me to conceptualize what is referred to as a cafe or the worship hall or an outdoor recreation area. All of those things are common in many locations, and as the applicant pointed out, with lots of examples. The trouble is, I don't think we have the definitive answer about what this site plan looks like. And so for me, we make our interpretation on the text, and we offer an opinion, whatever that may be, and I think the applicant has to then move to producing that site plan to identify the criteria that they're proposing to build, which is clearly a planning commission item. And if for some reason the applicant felt that the planning commission's decision was unjust and without cause, then they're welcome to come back to the zoning board of appeals. So I just want to try and refocus our attention to the idea that we need to make a determination on the textual, interpretation here. We have to decide whether or not we're in agreement that the principal use is religious in nature and that there are accessory uses. Furthermore, to Rodney's point, I think when you look at a site plan, and my background's in building, so I deal simply in terms of square footage or revenue generation. If you look at, to say a bar has X number of % of revenue in food sales versus alcohol sales, if you reach a certain point, you tip the limits, and now you're a bar, you're not just a restaurant. That's not in our purview tonight, right? Those questions of principal and accessory, square footage components of a cafe versus the worship center versus a staged area considered a theater or not, whatever we might want to call it. All of those things I think are more clearly able to be determined with a plan. And so I would encourage the applicant to be headed to the planning commission as soon as we can give an interpretation here. So,
Andy, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, I just wanted to refocus it and open up the discussion so that we might be headed towards a motion.
The other thing that I would like to make clear too is that the biggest concern that I have about this issue in general is not the nature of the request whatsoever, not the nature of having a church, not the nature of where it's located, not the nature of any of that. It's what's being done is highly unusual in a community planning process in general. Bypassing the planning commission, and if they're, Rodney, can you clarify? Did you decline to put them on the agenda for the planning commission? Did they ask to be on the agenda for the planning commission for any reason, and you declined to put them on the agenda?
No, they did not ask to be put on the agenda for the planning commission.
So to leapfrog the planning commission for feedback from the planning commission about the potential, just getting feedback, and we do get applicants for this all the time. People will come to us and say, we're thinking about doing this. Can you give us some feedback on this? To leapfrog that and to come to, and I want to make sure that everyone understands, because we do have a new member, I want to make sure that everyone understands, when we issue a clarification here, an interpretation of language, we are rewriting township ordinance when we do that. So if we choose to do so, what we're doing is saying we're not just doing it for this applicant, we're doing it across, we are essentially rewriting the B7 zoning district. That is like using a blowtorch where a scalpel is needed. And the biggest concern I have is that this has not been approached to the planning commission whatsoever. And it sets a dangerous precedent for any applicant who wants to do business or develop in the Mount Pleasant community, in Union Township, to say, if I don't want to deal with the planning commission, I'll go directly to the ZBA and ask them to rewrite ordinance for us. So I find it very disconcerting that we're even, so my point being is that's what we're being asked to do, rewrite township ordinance without the input of the planning commission right now, number one. And number two, we do have the option of issuing no opinion on this at all. We have the option of saying, we're not going to speak to the merit of doing this or not doing this. We're not going to interpret this language. We're going to ask them to pursue the avenues that are normally available to them first. And if there is an impasse, to come to us for interpretation when it's needed. I personally don't think we're there yet. I don't think we've hit an impasse. We haven't asked the question to the planning commission in the first place.
I appreciate your comments, Ryan. I tend to disagree with the idea that we're creating precedents because, again, by law, us approving or denying a variance would be a material change to the ordinance. We're being asked to interpret the text here. So it's common, and I've been on the Zoning Board of Appeals for years. We do get textual interpretations where people are asking us to identify our opinion about a piece of text. The road commission building that's been built and now in service, they came to us under cloak and dagger of an unknown applicant with an attorney who spoke out and said, can you define essential services? That was the question we were asked to define with no context. Here we have additional context, and that's my concern, is the additional context that we have is somehow muddying the waters, and all we are asked to do is decide, is the applicant's proposed operation religious in nature? If it is, it can be in a B7. The planning commission can then further dictate all the other criteria that are associated with all those other items that they'll have to identify on the plans, right? So I hear 100% what you're saying, but I don't think it circumvents the planning commission. I don't think it puts a blowtorch to the ordinance, as you said. I think it's just trying to narrow the focus so that they say, okay, you recognize we're a church. I feel like that's what we're being asked to determine. We're saying, yes, we understand your operation is religious in nature. You have accessory uses. I understand that. I'm not really concerned about all of the specifics of those accessory uses until we have the material information about them, which this board won't hear. That will go to the planning commission. So.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
So, in that scenario that you've kind of just described, what is, I don't think anyone is particularly saying that the question before us today is, are they a religious institution? I think the question is, we maybe assume that. It's probably a smart thing to assume given all the nice people here. But what about everything else? What are the accessory uses? And I mean, I think you have to, it's somewhere in between. I think what my position is somewhere in between what you've described and what has been described over here, which is, I mean, what does the planning commission do if you approve this today and they don't agree with the scope or the design or the layout or the frequency of use of any one of these uses? Then we're going to be back here.
That may very well be.
Right. And I guess the other thing I will say is that while you're not rewriting the ordinance, I can see how it might feel that way effectively, because it does set precedent. So what you do today, I'll leave you with this. What you do today certainly at a minimum sets precedent for how religious institutions and accessory uses are understood in B7. That is, at a minimum, you're binding the township to all of that, and depending on how your reasoning is laid out, it could be much more than that. So I do think that there is that aspect of it as well.
Thank you. If there's no more specific discussion, I mean, it feels like we could be here discussing the back and forth frequently. Is anyone interested in making a motion?
What?
Entertain a motion.
So we're here to clarify the accessory use issue? And so I would disagree that a coffee shop or a cafe or outdoor recreation for the general public is considered an accessory use for a church. I would disagree with that. I don't think that falls under the definition of what would be commonly viewed as a church activity. And there's wide latitude in that, but I do not believe that a coffee shop that's open to the public, for public to come in, purchase coffee, operate like a business in an economic development district for Union Township would be considered an accessory use. Nor, like I say, the other sticking point is outdoor recreation. Outdoor recreation facilities that are open, just generally open to the public, are not considered an accessory use for a church.
I'm sorry, can I go?
Yeah.
Ryan, will you just clarify, and maybe somebody else can, because maybe I missed that piece. Are you charging, or are these free assemblies for the people that would be potentially joining? Or is this a coffee shop where we're charging $5 a cup and $10 to use the recreational facility, which is, and I know that they say recreational facility, but again, in definition, it says playground, and their playground may be bigger than the playground at Faith Community Church, but I don't think there's anything on our definition that says size. But is there something, just because you had brought up that they would be charging for something, are they charging? Did I miss that they're charging? I didn't think they were charging for anything.
A coffee shop that's open to the public, you're not charging for that? It's in the materials.
Yeah,
The cafe
so
is in the
I
materials.
think we're off the rails here a little bit, because there was mention of a cafe, there was mention of an outdoor recreation facility. I think we need to keep our focus narrowed to, and I'll remind everybody, I want to kind of redraw the board members' attention back to the item on the agenda, which is our task is to interpret if all of the uses that Thrive Community Church included in their statement of use are fully consistent with the definition of a religious institution.
And the
in
cafe,
section 2.2 definitions, and the allowable land uses listed in section 3.15 B7 retail and highway service business district of the ordinance, and that none of the listed uses are consistent with theaters, assembly halls, concert halls, and similar places of public assembly or outdoor recreation facilities, which are not allowable in the B7 district. I want to read that.
That's in their materials, outdoor recreation in a cafe. How are we off the rails?
I don't think it's the purview to discuss whether or not they're charging people for coffee. I don't want to get sidetracked here, and this is what I find in a lot of public boards, that people are fixated on one particular item. So I don't mean to shoot you down, Bree, but I want to stick to the language that we're asked to interpret specifically here. They did give us a long list of uses, so I think everyone should be looking at that list of uses that the applicant provided, and then making a determination of if we feel those list of uses are fully consistent with the definition of a religious institution and the allowable land uses listed in section 3.15.
And so I would reiterate that what they listed in terms of a cafe and an outdoor recreation for the purposes of community use, not just church parishioners, not just members, are not consistent with the accessory uses of a church. And I think it's very clearly stated in the B7 zoning district that the outdoor recreation is not allowed in B7. Cafes are allowed obviously in B4 and B5. So if we're asking for, is there ambiguity in the ordinance, or in terms of, is there ambiguity in terms of the accepted use for B7 for outdoor recreation? No, there's no ambiguity there.
Correct.
Is there, I guess in terms of having a cafe within a church? Go ahead, Randy.
A cafe is allowed in the B7, so that.
Oh, I'm sorry,
make
no,
that clear.
no, I didn't, but in terms of, is that generally considered
You're
as an accessory
questioning
use?
the difference between the cafe as a principal use and whether it could be deemed an accessory use to the religious institution, right?
Under our current definition, under our current definitions of what we have.
Right.
I don't think that a cafe would be generally considered an accessory use. A cafe that's open to the public would be considered an accessory use for a religious institution.
again, I've read the required task at hand here, which is an interpretation to determine if all of the following uses that Thrive Community Church included in their statement of use are fully consistent with the definition of religious institution in section 2.2 and the allowable land uses listed in section 3.15 of the zoning ordinance, and that none of the listed uses are consistent with theaters, assembly halls, concert halls, and similar places of public assembly. That's our task, and one of the points that I want to make that I think is critical for us to consider, this is not a movie theater setting up shop and saying, oh, by the way, we're going to have a coffee shop. Oh, by the way, we're going to have an outdoor recreation facility. We're going to host public concerts, all the while attempting to make money. This is a religious institution by right, allowed. It's a principal permitted use to be a religious institution in the B7. We've all agreed to that. No one disputes that.
Correct.
So we're into the weeds a little bit here about the listed uses, listed accessory uses that they've provided, and we need to try and navigate through that to see if we feel like those are part of the including but not limited to referenced in the definitions as accessory uses allowable to a religious institution. I, for one, have no objection to any of the items that they listed, and it's basically I'm hung on one specific word, to be frank with you, Ryan. It's the last statement here in our task is, and that none of the listed uses are consistent with theaters, assembly halls, concert halls, and similar places of public assembly. Public assembly. This is not, the church's mission is community outreach, so in obviously in general that's going to include members of the public, right? They're clearly seeming like a very welcoming bunch, right? I don't think anybody's going to dispute that. So I think there certainly could be members, general public members, who are not necessarily members of the church that could choose to come in and participate in a service, or I'm sure they'd welcome people to come in and join in some of the activities that they're having, or hosting events that are what are undisputably good for the community. But at the end of the day, everything that they do is under the umbrella of the religious institution, which is allowable. So for me, it's not hard. Not hard at all.
I don't think that's true at all. I don't think it's.
That's your
I don't
opinion.
think it's. Well, sure, yeah, of course it's my opinion, but I don't think it's true to say that just because it's a church and it's established as a nonprofit church that they can do whatever they want underneath.
I didn't say that, but
Well, sure, but you did. You actually just said that.
I said everything that they are describing falls under the umbrella of the religious institution as an accessory use. So I think, as we have seen in multiple meetings, you and I will usually be at odds, but I would like to call to question the task again. We have to make a determination, an interpretation rather, to determine if all the following uses that Thrive Community Church included in their statement of use are fully consistent with the definition of a religious institution in section 2.2 and the allowable land uses listed in section 3.15, B7 Retail and Highway Service Business District of the zoning ordinance, and that none of the listed uses are consistent with theaters, assembly halls, concert halls, and similar places of public assembly or outdoor recreation facilities which are not allowable in the uses in B7 district. Does anyone wish to make a motion?
I'll motion that. I'll make a motion to, do you want me to repeat it all?
You're going to have to clarify a position.
I will make a motion to determine that Thrive Community Church included in their statement the uses are fully consistent with the definition of religious institution in section 2.2 and the allowable land uses listed in section 3.15 B7 Retail and Highway Service Business District of the zoning ordinance, and that none of the listed uses are consistent with theaters, assembly halls, concert halls, and similar places of public assembly or outdoor recreational facilities which are not allowable uses in the B7 district.
We have a motion. Is there support? If there is no support for the motion would die, and I would ask for another motion.
I think I'm just stuck on the outdoor recreation component. If that is that, am I correct? That's kind of that's a clear not allowed in B7. Am I
Correct.
correct? So including it here and just, I in principle want to second that motion because I agree all of these uses align with what I know a church to be. I am sure there's a lot of churches with basketball courts and out. So I think where I'm struggling is, does approving that change what? I mean, that's not going to completely alter our. I guess that feels like the sticking point to me. Everything it's very black and white to me. It's very easy, with exception to that one component, because it's vague. It's outdoor recreation facilities for both Thrive Church and community members. I don't know if that means basketball courts, baseball fields, just grassy field that we're going to play kickball in. I don't know enough, I guess, to understand. And maybe it doesn't matter, but it does feel like if that is an explicit no-no for B7, I don't want to glaze over it.
And just to bring your attention to what you just read, it's for community church or for Thrive members and the community. So it is outwardly focused. And we did hear conversations about the core element of their ministry being outwardly focused, but it does they're presenting it as a outdoor community recreation. And so we don't have anything else to interpret it on. We can't ask them, what's that going to be? But as it stands, I would agree with your concern. I guess I would then make a motion for effectively the opposite. And again, you've read it, Andy, multiple times now. But essentially, the sticking point being the outdoor recreation. But
So I want to comment on the outdoor recreation comment that outdoor recreation, gymnasiums, playgrounds are an allowed accessory use to the religious institution.
a gymnasium isn't an outdoor recreation.
The term playground is used just for clarification.
That's why gym and playground. So I was referencing the including but not limited to. So for me, again, what is this outdoor recreation facility? Again, that's a question for the planning commission, and I think it's not a challenge to say that religious institutions are allowable, and as an accessory to that religious institution, the playground is clearly identified there.
Right.
So without more information about what the playground is, I think
And
that's
that
where
would
we would
still
be on
have
that.
to be vetted at a planning commission level.
Correct.
Once there wouldn't be, our decision here wouldn't say throw up any kind of outdoor recreation you would like and it will be approved. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Mr. Chair, may I answer that question? So, I would say that if you take the action the motion proposed to take, you have the circumstance where you are telling the planning commission that they have to pretty much allow whatever they say is an accessory use. And they're going to come in with a site plan and say, this is our accessory outdoor recreation facility. So we have the challenge here that I think, Mr. Chair, you actually commented that's really a question for the planning commission. That is actually the whole point of this, is that these are all questions for the planning commission. You don't have the information tonight that you really need to make a decision because you don't have a site plan. The site plan is where the rubber hits the road and where all these things are detailed. So you can actually see how the things lay out, where the building is, how big it is, how big the outdoor recreation is, what it's going to be used for. All those elements come into play on the plan, none of which you have before you tonight. These are all things that the planning commission reviews, and that's the reason why it is most appropriate for this matter to be in front of the planning commission, because they look at it, both the statement, but also at the same time, on the same document, they're looking at the plans. And none of that is before you tonight. I certainly understand that much of this, in terms of the notice that we provided, we had 10 items, and we summarized from their 2-page document, 3-page document. Many of those items, as was said, fit neatly underneath the definition of religious institution. We have a few that don't. And those are all things that are within the purview of the planning commission to review and make decisions on when they have a plan in front of them. And then that's an administrative action. So that their action, if the applicant does not like their action in the end, that administrative action can then be appealed to this body. That's the appropriate process for this to take. But the reason you're struggling with this is entirely because this is normally reviewed as part of a site plan process, where all the information is at hand. You only have part of the story. And that's why this matter is really more appropriate to be handled in front of the planning commission. As was discussed, anybody can come before them with a napkin sketch even. And a very simple plan. We often see a very simple, what I might call a sketch plan, that somebody brings before them to say, this is what we're thinking about. What are your thoughts? And we're always happy to have people come on the agenda. We have a process for that. It's a presentation item, there's no cost. They provide whatever they want to provide. We give it to the planning commission, and they have an informal conversation with them about it. So that's where this needs to go. And the reason you're struggling with it is entirely because that's where this process needs to go, not before each night.
And just to clarify, both the applicant and the community members that spoke have all, and within the materials, have all referred to this as a community center. The community center is different. Outdoor recreation facility. Community center is not. There is a difference. That those words have meanings. So we're using the words that we were provided, and we're not speculating on what that might be, only that this is what was provided as an accessory use.
So Bree had made a motion. I had asked for a second. I haven't received a second.
I'm ready to make a motion.
So that motion is dead, and I'm looking for another motion.
I'm ready to make a motion. I move that the Union Township Zoning Board of Appeals adopt the following findings and decision with regard to the pending zoning ordinance interpretation application offered by Thrive Church. 1. Applicant Thrive has sought an interpretation request from the Union Township Zoning Board of Appeals. 2. Thrive's proposed development is the B7 retail. Thrive's proposed development is the B7 Retail and Service Highway Business District. Number 3, religious institutions are a principal permitted use in the B7 district. Number 4, the interpretation request asks the ZBA to interpret the Union Township zoning ordinance to allow each of approximately 10 uses as accessory uses to a religious institution in the B7 district. Number 5, there are a wide range of proposed uses included in the application. Number 6, after reviewing the application, the materials submitted, and the arguments offered by the applicant, it is clear that additional information about the precise scope and nature.
Precedence is not an allowable reason to approve or deny a variance. However, when we're looking at a textual interpretation, that is a broader stroke that says this is the official position of the township on our ordinance. And so if there's concern about a specific item, I think that's the item that needs to be identified. Whether it's deny us making a motion and refer it to the planning commission, or it's approve it wholesale as it's written, or if there's something in between that everyone could feel more comfortable with, or I should say a majority feel more comfortable with.
I would be comfortable with removing reference to outdoor recreation facility and any cafe that's open to the general public.
And could I ask something that might help clarify and maybe move forward is, in this hypothetical motion that hasn't been made yet, are you, for these problem areas, are you proposing that this board take no position on those? But take a position on the other ones, because I do think it is important, and it's somewhat reflected in this motion read here, which is, you can, I think, in my opinion as your attorney, you can make a mistake by giving a very broad decision tonight, okay? And I think we've discussed that. You can also make a mistake by giving a very broad decision in the other way, almost to the point where it could be described as a narrow decision, because then this group doesn't have as many tools in their toolbox when they go back to the planning commission.
Correct.
Right? So my only recommendation as your attorney would be, if you're going to go with what I'll call a middle ground, where you go through the list of the summary, just be clear that if you're not saying something is clearly an accessory use, you should be clear what you are saying about that item, whether we're saying it's clearly not an accessory use, or we don't have enough information right now, because that leaves the door open for the planning commission to make a decision on
So
those.
we could go through, we could conceivably have a motion that says, we affirm these uses and we do not speak to these uses.
Correct.
I think if you're heading in that direction, it would give the applicant the most room to maneuver.
I would absolutely be comfortable with that.
I feel for what the applicant's attempting to do here, and I think what they're doing in the community is fantastic, and I think we gotta try and narrow our focus to giving them some latitude to navigate that process with the planning commission, because as Ryan said,
Yeah.
that's clearly where most of these items belong. And when we look at this, we have the summary of proposed uses, on page 13. So I would like to start that discussion if the board would entertain that idea. As we look at this, I'm gonna read them one by one, and if we could confirm or deny that we believe that is religious in nature, part of the principal use or an accessory use. I think that gets us some good momentum here.
Yes.
So number one, worship services in our worship center, assembly hall on a weekly basis, clearly
Yes.
religious. Classrooms for weekly religious education, number two,
Yes.
clearly religious. Meeting rooms, church offices,
Yes.
Yes.
kitchen and cafe.
In the document that was provided to us, the cafe is suggestive of something that's open to the general public. A kitchen or a cafe that's used for functions that are held within the church, I would have no issue with. Something that's open to the public that could potentially be something that is a business activity, transactional sales, I think should be left to the planning commission to discuss. So,
And I hear exactly what you're saying. Kitchens are an accessory use to the church, which you
absolutely,
agree.
right.
The cafe could be as part of the church. They could have coffee service or coffee at worship service or meeting rooms, etc.
But unless I'm mistaken, that was articulated as potentially something different in the materials.
And I agree with, this is where my mind sticks, cafes are allowed in the B7. So to me, that's arbitrary because it's a permitted use. So if they want to have a cafe, they can have that. And Rodney's already
Correct.
indicated to
You're
us
right.
that they
You're right.
they could have 3 to 5 principal
Yep.
uses on the structure. So that
You're
one
right.
doesn't really bother me.
You've
per
made
se.
a good point. That doesn't bother me.
So can we agree
yes.
that seems like a religious
Yep,
use?
you're right.
Host weddings, baptisms, funerals, or other religious and secular ceremonies and celebrations. Seems in line.
Yes.
Host Christian music artists.
Yes.
Host religious and secular community gatherings, conferences, meetings, public events, social events, and outreach activities.
Yes.
Ryan's the only one responding
Yes.
verbally.
Yes. Sorry.
So I just want to clarify for the record that no one else has objected.
Yes.
Thank you. Item 8, community piano recitals or school graduation ceremonies. I think that's a commonly
Yes.
occurring item in religious institutions. Outdoor recreation facilities for both Thrive Church and community members. That's a sticking point.
I would say remain silent on
Okay,
that.
so let's figure that out. And then 10, this one again is very arbitrary, but if the Girl Scouts, members of a yoga or exercise studio, or members of a nonprofit organization desire to meet or host an event in our space, we would love to accommodate such a request, just as a private school or fraternal organization or lodge hall in our zoning district would do. I'm not offended by that
That's
at
a
all.
common function of a church.
Okay, so it's clear to me that we have some momentum here as a board, which is nice, because it's 8:45. The outdoor recreation facility is a sticking point for at least a few of us. I want to stress that I think I can speak for everyone that says that I think this is a good project, right? I don't think anybody's refuting that. We're just saying that we don't maybe have the tools or the information about what an outdoor recreation facility could be, and we run the risk of putting the township in a compromised position without those details. And so I would like to know, is anyone willing to make a motion that would allow us to agree that the summary of proposed uses 1 through 8 and 10 would be consistent with the principal allowable uses as defined by a religious institution in section 2.2 and the allowable land uses listed in section 3.15 of the zoning ordinance, and that outdoor recreation facilities need to be further vetted by the planning commission. Is
So
that an
moved.
adequate
So moved.
summary?
So moved.
We have a motion by Member Buckley.
I
Do we
second.
have
I was
support?
gonna say, can I clarify that number 9 will just go to the planning commission.
We are
that
not
we-
affirming or denying the outdoor recreation facility. We're asking the planning commission to vet that item out at the time in which they come to site plan approval.
So then can I clarify again, when they take this to the planning commission, this is where there's no charge for them to take this to the planning commission and they don't have to create the site plan to include everything?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Well, if they want to, they can go to the planning commission informally, but
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. So they can submit their application to go to the planning commission. And as Ryan mentioned and Rodney's mentioned, they could sketch something out, propose, hey, this is what we're thinking, and then not spend all that money to produce a site plan to have the planning commission say, that doesn't really fit the criteria, right? So I would encourage the applicant to pursue that
The
open
planning-
format of the planning commission.
The planning commission can say, based on your description, if you're proposing a 1,000 square foot playground with you know, a slide and stuff like that, they can say we would find that favorable. They're not passing a motion. The planning commission is not making a motion to approve it. The planning commission is giving feedback saying that would generally be acceptable or not, which is also commensurate with the fact that they brought in essentially a sketch rather than a site plan. The planning commission can also give feedback and say, and I don't know if this comes to the planning commission, I would have to have a conversation with Rodney as being on the ZBA, whether or not I would even have to recuse, so.
Well, and I don't want to cut you off here,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but I want to make sure we've got record. You had made the motion.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I heard you say you support, but I
Yep.
don't know, we then started digressing. So we do have, I'm gonna call the question. We have a motion, we have support.
Yep.
We're now obviously in the middle of discussion,
Sure.
but I would like to call the question and I'd like to vote. So we have a motion to approve the summary of proposed uses as consistent with our zoning ordinance, items 1 through 8, and item 10 on page 13. And I'm mostly reciting this so that Tara can get good record of it. And then we are neither affirming nor denying the request for interpretation on the proposed use of outdoor recreation facilities, item 9. Motion made, seconded. We've discussed at length.
Can I make one clarification? Just, if you said approve the uses, that you're proving that they are consistent with the definition of
Consistent,
religious
this is what I read,
institution.
consistent with the
Religious
definition
institution.
of religious institution in section 2.2. And if you need help fine tuning that, I'm happy to help you do that at a later time. So we have a motion, we have support, we've exhausted our discussion. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Actually, I apologize, if you would,
Roll call.
please, a roll call vote for this.
We could roll call vote that. Let's do it.
All right, Buckley,
Aye.
Mogenberg,
I'm going to say no. I think 9 should be included.
Presnell,
Yes.
Tyson,
Aye.
3 ayes. I believe that passes.
Motion carries. So, after lengthy deliberation and action, we've rendered I think, a very fair and reasonable decision, and we encourage the applicant to pursue the next step in their process, which would be a meeting with the planning commission. So usually at this time, we're telling the applicant that the actions of the ZBA are not in effect until 30 days after, which is our next meeting, but because this is interpretation, they're free and clear to move forward to the planning commission. I thank the members of the public who participated and those who came simply to witness the public hearing. I'm closing our new business item A and moving on to the remainder of our agenda, which is the adoption of the 2023 schedule of meetings. That was handed out by Tara as we sat down. Mr. LaBelle, welcome back to the fold.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
So, I mean, at the risk of taking the air out of this agenda item, the Board of Trustees is going to approve this, so it's really a formality that we're all aware of what the meeting schedule is going to be. We encourage everyone to participate in all the meetings as is required by our bylaws, but there's the schedule of proposed meetings. Rodney, do you have anything to add to that?
I do not. We should have a motion, though.
Okay, so I would take a motion to accept the proposed schedule of meetings for 2023.
Motion to accept as
Motion by
presented.
Buckley. Do I have support?
Support.
Support LaBelle. Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting the proposed schedule for 2023, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Other business. Does anyone have any other business they would like to discuss at tonight's meeting? Hearing none. Move on to item 10, which is extended public comment. At this time, extended public comment would be open to any member of the public wishing to speak on any issue that concerns the Board of Appeals, and I would remind you, you'd be restricted to 5 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record.
Aileen Liprant, I'm an attorney from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I just want to thank the board for your deliberation. When things go past an hour, I know it just gets a little bit more difficult. These are not easy issues, and I appreciate the attention that you're giving to them. They're important issues, so just want to reach out to you. I know it's not always an easy task, and there are sometimes people who are disappointed and sometimes people happy, and I just want to thank you for the job that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close it. So we opened it, did you get that at 8:52 and closed at 8:53? Okay, thank you. Final board comment.
I would only like to say that we may have kind of glossed over correspondence and board reports, but I think that the Plan Commission has been having conversations about reopening some master planning stuff for the next year. And so we can keep the ZBA apprised of that and what we're doing, but along the way we may look at some ordinance issues as well. So it's just so you're aware that we're reaching that point of doing that.
Thank you. Any other members of the board wishing to speak?
Just to reiterate, thank you to everybody that showed up tonight. It's long for you guys as well, and you know, we certainly see how much you value the community, and so just really appreciate you guys showing up, and hope to see this comes to fruition. And I know it's been a lengthy process, so just appreciate it.
I want to thank staff and legal counsel, as well as our board members for a good discussion. I think sometimes we don't always agree, but it's nice when we can find that common ground, and in this case also help the applicant. So I thank everybody for their participation. On a personal note, I would like to say that this will be my last meeting as a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. My term is up December 31st, and I have quite a few family obligations that make it harder and harder to get to these meetings, and there are things that I just don't want to miss anymore. I do enjoy my time that I've spent on the ZBA for many years. Maybe someday I'll have a more free time that I can devote to it again, but I just thank everybody for being able to work with you over the years, and look forward to watching everyone continue to work through items that come to the ZBA. So thank you.
Thanks for your service.
serving.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. If no one has any other comments, meeting is adjourned at 8:55.